Hello, horror lover. Are you ready for a long night of nightmares? Before we begin, I want to ask you to subscribe to the channel, and especially leave a comment telling me which city you're watching from. I'd love to know. Click the like button, all of this because the harsh fluorescent light flickered to life as I flipped the switch, momentarily blinding me. I squinted, letting my eyes adjust to the sudden brightness of my bathroom. It had been another late night at the law firm, and exhaustion weighed heavily on my shoulders. I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror and sighed. Dark circles under my eyes betrayed the long hours I'd been putting in on this case. Just a few more days, Jennifer, I muttered to myself, reaching for my toothbrush. Then you can finally get some rest. As I began my nightly routine, my mind wandered to the upcoming trial. It was a high-profile corporate fraud case, and as the lead attorney, the pressure was immense. I had been preparing for months, and now, with only days to go, I was running on caffeine and sheer determination. I splashed some cold water on my face, hoping to wash away some of the fatigue. As I reached for the towel, something in my peripheral vision made me pause. I blinked hard, convinced my tired eyes were playing tricks on me in the harsh bathroom light. Slowly, I lowered the towel and looked directly into the mirror. My heart skipped a beat. The face staring back at me wasn't quite right. It was subtle, but undeniable. The shape of the eyes, the curve of the nose, they were just slightly off. I leaned in closer, my nose almost touching the glass. "What the hell?" I whispered, my breath fogging the mirror. I raised my hand to touch my face, and the reflection did the same, but the hand I saw in the mirror wasn't mine. The fingers were longer, the nails a different shape. A chill ran down my spine as I realized the stranger in the mirror mimicked my movements perfectly. Panic began to rise in my throat. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the bath mat. My heart was racing, pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. "This isn't real," I said aloud, my voice shaky. "I'm just tired. I'm seeing things." I forced myself to look in the mirror again. The face was still wrong, but now it seemed even more distorted. The eyes were a different color, the cheekbones higher. I touched my face, feeling the familiar contours beneath my fingertips, but the reflection showed a hand I don't recognize caressing an alien face. "No, no, no," I muttered, shaking my head vigorously. The reflection copied the movement, but it felt like watching a stranger wearing my pajamas, standing in my bathroom. I stumbled out of the bathroom, heart racing, desperate to convince myself it was just a momentary hallucination. In the dimness of my bedroom, I caught sight of my vanity mirror and quickly threw a scarf over it. I couldn't bear to look again. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, making me jump. With trembling hands, I picked it up. It was a text from my colleague, Michael. "Hey Jen, just checking in. You seemed off today. Everything okay?" I stared at the message, my mind reeling. Should I tell him? Would he even believe me? I started typing, then deleted it. Started again, deleted again. Finally, I settled on a response. "Just tired. Big case and all. I'll be fine." I hit send and tossed the phone aside. Lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling, my mind replaying the bathroom scene over and over. Was I losing it? The stress of the case, the long hours, the pressure. Was it all finally getting to me? As I drifted off to sleep, a nagging fear settled in my gut, whispering that nothing would ever be the same again. The next morning I woke with a start, momentarily disoriented. Sunlight streamed through the gaps in my curtains, and for a blissful moment, I forgot about the events of the previous night. Then it all came rushing back. I sat up slowly, my eyes darting to the covered vanity mirror. Part of me wanted to rip off the scarf and prove to myself that it had all been a dream. But a larger part was terrified of what I might see. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Michael. "Meeting in 30. Don't forget to bring the Johnson files." Reality came crashing back. I had a job to do, a case to win. I couldn't let whatever this was interfere with that. With a deep breath, I forced myself out of bed and towards the bathroom. My hand hesitated on the doorknob. What if it happened again? What if the face in the mirror was even more distorted? "Pull yourself together," I muttered, gritting my teeth. I pushed open the door and stepped inside, my eyes squeezed shut. Slowly, I opened one eye, then the other. I looked in the mirror. My reflection stared back at me. My reflection. Normal, familiar, unchanged. Relief washed over me so strongly that my knees nearly buckled. I laughed out loud, the sound echoing off the tiled walls. "See? You were just tired. Everything's fine," I told my reflection, smiling at the absurdity of it all. I quickly showered and dressed, feeling more like myself with each passing minute. By the time I grabbed my briefcase and headed out the door, the events of the previous night felt like a distant, slightly embarrassing dream. The day passed in a blur of meetings, phone calls, and last-minute preparations. It wasn't until I was packing up to leave that Michael stopped by my office. "Hey, Jen," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "You got a minute?" I glanced at my watch. "Sure, what's up?" He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "I wanted to check in with you. You've seemed distracted lately. Is everything okay?" I forced a smile. "Of course. Just focused on the case, that's all." Michael raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure? Because in the meeting this morning, you called me David. Twice." I felt the color drain from my face. I did?" He nodded, his expression concerned. "Look, Jen, I know this case is huge, but if you're not at your best, we need to know. The whole team is depending on you." I swallowed hard, my mind racing. Had I really called him David? I had no memory of it. What else had I done today that I couldn't remember? "I'm fine, Michael, really," I insisted, but my voice lacked conviction. "I just need a good night's sleep, that's all." He didn't look convinced, but he nodded. "All right. But if you need anything, you know you can come to me, right? We're not just colleagues, we're friends." "I know," I said softly. "Thank you." After he left, I sat at my desk, my head in my hands. What was happening to me? Was I losing my mind? The drive home was a blur. I found myself standing in front of my bathroom mirror again, staring at my reflection. It looked normal, just like this morning. But now I didn't trust it. I leaned in close, studying every detail of my face. Was that mole always there? Had my eyebrows always been that shape? As I scrutinized my reflection, a flicker of movement caught my eye. For just a split second, it was as if my face had shifted, morphed into someone else. I jerked back, my heart pounding. "No," I said firmly, gripping the edges of the sink. "This isn't real. This can't be real." But as I looked back at the mirror, the face staring back at me was undeniably different. The changes were subtle, a slightly sharper jawline, a small scar above the left eyebrow that I knew I didn't have. But it was enough to send a wave of terror through me. I stumbled out of the bathroom, slamming the door behind me. In the living room, I paced back and forth, trying to make sense of what was happening. Was I hallucinating? Having some kind of breakdown? Or was something far more sinister at play? As I sank onto the couch, my gaze fell on a framed photo on the coffee table. It was me, taken just a few months ago at a firm event. I picked it up, studying it intently. This was me. This was my face. So why did it suddenly feel so unfamiliar? I realized then that this was more than just a bizarre occurrence or a stress-induced hallucination. Something was fundamentally wrong, and I needed to figure out what it was. As I drifted off to sleep that night, curled up on the couch because I couldn't bear to be near any mirrors, a nagging fear settled in my gut. It whispered dark possibilities, hinted at horrors beyond my comprehension, and it left me with one chilling certainty: nothing would ever be the same again. The shrill sound of my alarm pierced through the fog of a restless sleep. I jolted awake, momentarily disoriented to find myself on the couch instead of in bed. As the events of the previous night came rushing back, a wave of anxiety washed over me. It was just a dream, I muttered to myself, running a hand through my tangled hair. Just a very vivid, very unsettling dream. I stood up, my muscles protesting after a night on the uncomfortable couch. Sunlight streamed through the windows, casting a warm glow on the familiar surroundings of my living room. Everything looked normal, ordinary. It was almost enough to convince me that nothing had happened. Almost. I avoided mirrors for days, terrified of what I might see staring back at me. My morning routine became a careful dance of averting my eyes and relying on muscle memory to apply makeup and style my hair. At work, I kept my head down, focusing intently on the upcoming case and avoiding reflective surfaces. My colleague, Michael, noticed my odd behavior. He cornered me in the break room on the third day. "Jen, what's going on with you?" he asked, his voice low and concerned. "You've been acting strange all week." I forced a smile, keeping my eyes fixed on the coffee machine. "I'm fine, Michael, just focused on the case." He sighed, unconvinced. "You haven't looked me in the eye once this entire conversation. Something's wrong and I'm worried about you." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. Was I being that obvious? I took a deep breath and finally met his gaze. "I'm just not feeling like myself lately," I admitted. It wasn't a lie, not really. Michael's expression softened. "Is it the pressure of the case? Because if you need help..." "No." I cut him off, perhaps too quickly. "No, it's not that. I haven't been sleeping well, that's all." He nodded slowly, clearly not entirely satisfied with my explanation. "Okay, but if you need anything..." "I know," I said, managing a small smile. "Thanks, Michael." As I walked back to my office, coffee in hand, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in a window. For a moment, just a fraction of a second, I saw a face that wasn't mine staring back at me. I blinked, and it was gone. My heart raced as I hurried back to my desk. This couldn't go on. I needed to face my fears. That evening I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, hands trembling as I gripped the edge of the sink. I took a deep breath and slowly raised my eyes to meet my reflection. Relief washed over me as I saw my familiar face staring back at me. My eyes, my nose, my mouth. Everything was as it should be. I let out a shaky laugh, feeling foolish for having been so afraid. "See?" I told my reflection. "You were just stressed. Everything's fine." But as the days passed, subtle changes crept in, leaving me questioning my own sanity. One morning I noticed that my eyes seemed a shade darker than usual. The next day my cheekbones appeared slightly more pronounced. Each change was so small, so incremental, that I could almost convince myself I was imagining it. Almost. I found myself obsessively studying old photographs, trying to anchor myself to the person I used to be. I spent hours poring over pictures from my childhood, my college years, recent vacations. I scrutinized every detail, desperately searching for proof that I was still me. One night, as I sat surrounded by photo albums, my phone rang. It was my mother. "Jennifer, honey, is everything okay?" Her voice was laced with worry. "You haven't been returning my calls." Guilt washed over me. I had been so caught up in my own turmoil that I'd been neglecting my relationships. "I'm sorry, Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Work's been really busy with this big case coming up." "Are you sure that's all it is?" she pressed. "You sound different." My breath caught in my throat. Did I sound different? Was my voice changing too? "I'm fine, Mom," I lied, hating myself for it. "Just tired. I promise I'll call more often." After hanging up, I sat in silence, staring at a photo of myself from last Christmas. The woman in the picture smiled back at me, carefree and confident. I touched my face, tracing the contours that no longer felt quite right. As I prepared for an important court appearance the next day, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing grip on my identity. Standing in front of my closet, I realized with a start that some of my clothes no longer fit quite right. Had my body changed too, or was I simply losing weight from the stress? In the courtroom, I delivered my opening statement with practiced ease, but inside I was a mess of anxiety and doubt. As I spoke, I caught my distorted reflection in a window, and for a moment I forgot who I was. The words faltered on my lips, and I saw the judge raise an eyebrow. "Miss Thompson, are you all right?" he asked. I blinked, forcing myself back to the present. "Yes, Your Honor. I apologize. May I have a moment to collect my thoughts?" He nodded, and I took a deep breath, willing myself to focus. I couldn't let this, whatever it was, jeopardize my career, my life's work. After court, I retreated to my office, closing the door and sinking into my chair. My colleagues had started to notice something was off, their concerned glances only fueling my paranoia. I caught snippets of whispered conversations in the hallway. "Is Jennifer okay? She seems different lately. Do you think she's cracking under the pressure?" I wanted to scream, to tell them that something was happening to me, something I couldn't explain or understand. But how could I, when I barely believed it myself? That evening, I broke down in my office, overwhelmed by the fear that I was disappearing piece by piece. Tears streamed down my face as I stared at my reflection in the darkened window, barely recognizing the person looking back at me. A knock at the door startled me out of my spiral. I quickly wiped my eyes and called out, "Come in." It was Sarah, my paralegal and closest friend at the firm. Her eyes widened as she took in my tear-stained face. "Jen, what's wrong?" she asked, rushing to my side. In that moment, the weight of everything I'd been carrying alone came crashing down. I broke down again, sobbing as Sarah held me. "I don't know what's happening to me," I choked out between sobs. "I feel like I'm losing myself." Sarah listened patiently as I poured out a garbled version of what I'd been experiencing. To her credit, she didn't interrupt or look at me like I was crazy. When I finished, she took my hands in hers. "Jen, I don't understand what's going on, but I believe you," she said firmly. "And we're going to figure this out together, okay?" Her words were a lifeline, a reminder that I wasn't completely alone. But as I looked into her eyes, I saw a flicker of doubt, of worry. She believed that I believed what I was saying, but I could tell she thought stress had pushed me to some kind of breaking point. As I drove home that night, I was haunted by the thought that I might wake up as someone else entirely. The city lights blurred as tears filled my eyes again. Who would I be tomorrow? Would there come a day when I looked in the mirror and saw a complete stranger? I pulled into my driveway and sat in the car for a long moment, gathering the courage to go inside and face another night of uncertainty. As I finally stepped out of the car, a chill ran down my spine. For a split second, I could have sworn I saw a face watching me from my bedroom window. A face that wasn't mine. I blinked, and it was gone. But the fear remained, a constant companion as I walked into my house, into a future I no longer recognized. The courthouse loomed before me, its imposing facade a stark reminder of the gravity of today's proceedings. I took a deep breath, straightening my suit jacket and clutching my briefcase like a lifeline. Today was crucial, the opening arguments for the corporate fraud case that had consumed my life for months. As I climbed the steps, my colleague Michael fell into step beside me. "Ready for this, Jen?" he asked, his tone a mixture of excitement and concern. I nodded, not trusting my voice. The truth was, I felt far from ready. The changes in my appearance had accelerated over the past week, and the constant fear of discovery was wearing me down. We made our way through security and into the bustling courtroom. As we set up at the prosecution's table, I caught sight of my reflection in one of the large windows. For a moment, I forgot who I was. The face staring back at me was almost unrecognizable. The eyes were a different shape, the nose slightly crooked in a way it had never been before. I blinked hard, willing my familiar features to return, but they remained stubbornly altered. "Miss Thompson?" The judge's voice cut through my panic. "Are you ready to proceed?" I turned, realizing with horror that the entire courtroom was staring at me. How long had I been standing there gaping at my reflection? Yes, Your Honor, I stammered, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. My apologies. I'm ready. As I began my opening statement, I could feel the weight of every eye in the room. The words I had rehearsed countless times suddenly felt clumsy on my tongue. I stumbled over phrases, lost my train of thought mid-sentence. From the corner of my eye, I saw Michael shifting uncomfortably in his seat. The judge's brow was furrowed, and the jury looked confused. I was blowing it, and I knew it. Halfway through my statement, I caught another glimpse of my distorted reflection in the window. For a moment, I forgot where I was, what I was doing. The words died in my throat. Ms. Thompson? The judge prompted, his tone sharp. Is everything all right? I blinked, forcing myself back to reality. I'm sorry, Your Honor. May I request a brief recess? The judge's frown deepened, but he nodded. We'll take a 15-minute recess. Counselors, approach the bench. As Michael and I stepped forward, along with the defense attorney, I could feel the tension radiating from everyone in the room. Ms. Thompson, the judge said in a low voice, I don't know what's going on with you today, but you need to pull yourself together. If you're not capable of proceeding... I am, Your Honor. I interrupted, desperation coloring my tone. I just need a moment to collect myself. It won't happen again. He studied me for a long moment before nodding curtly. See that it doesn't. As we left the courtroom, Michael grabbed my arm, steering me into an empty conference room. What the hell was that, Jen? He hissed, his face a mask of concern and frustration. You were all over the place in there. Are you sick? Because if you are... I'm fine, I snapped, pulling away from him. I didn't sleep well last night. I'll be fine after the recess. Michael's expression softened slightly. Jen, if something's going on... Nothing's going on, I insisted, even as I avoided meeting his eyes. I can handle this. But as I splashed cold water on my face in the bathroom, trying to regain my composure, I knew I was lying. To Michael, to myself, to everyone. My colleagues had started to notice something was off, their concerned glances only fueling my paranoia. When we returned to the courtroom, I managed to finish my opening statement without further incident, but I could tell the damage had been done. The jury looked skeptical, the judge irritated. As we broke for lunch, I overheard two junior associates whispering, What's up with Jennifer? She seems different lately. Do you think she's cracking under the pressure? Their words sent a chill down my spine. Was I really so transparent? Could everyone see the changes that were consuming me? The rest of the day passed in a blur of testimonies and cross-examinations. I went through the motions, but my heart wasn't in it. Every time I caught a glimpse of my reflection, I felt a surge of panic. Who was I becoming? As the court adjourned for the day, I practically ran to my office, locking the door behind me. I collapsed into my chair, my breath coming in short gasps. The walls seemed to be closing in around me. A knock at the door made me jump. Jen, it's Sarah. Can I come in? I hesitated, then reluctantly unlocked the door. Sarah, my paralegal and closest friend at the firm, stepped inside, her face etched with worry. What happened in there today? She asked gently, perching on the edge of my desk. I opened my mouth to offer another excuse, another lie, but something in Sarah's kind eyes broke my resolve. To my horror, I felt hot tears spilling down my cheeks. I don't know what's happening to me, I choked out between sobs. I feel like I'm losing myself. Sarah listened in stunned silence as I poured out everything. The changing reflections, the constant fear, the feeling that I was disappearing piece by piece. When I finished, I expected to see disbelief or judgment in her eyes. Instead, I saw only compassion. Oh, Jen, she said softly, pulling me into a hug. Why didn't you tell me sooner? We'll figure this out together, I promise. Her kindness only made me cry harder. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe I wasn't going crazy. Maybe, with Sarah's help, I could find a way through this nightmare. As my sobs subsided, Sarah pulled back, her expression serious. "Jen, have you considered seeing a doctor? Or maybe a therapist? There might be a medical explanation for what you're experiencing." I shook my head vehemently. "They'll think I'm insane." "Hell, I think I'm insane." "You're not insane," Sarah said firmly. "Something is clearly happening to you and we need to find out what it is. Will you at least consider talking to someone?" I nodded reluctantly, too exhausted to argue further. As Sarah left, promising to research specialists who might be able to help, I turned to face the window. My distorted reflection stared back at me, a stranger wearing my clothes, sitting in my office. That night, as I drove home, my mind raced with possibilities. Was this some kind of rare medical condition? A mental breakdown brought on by stress? Or something more sinister? I pulled into my driveway and sat in the car for a long moment, gathering the courage to go inside and face another night of uncertainty. As I finally stepped out of the car, movement in my peripheral vision made me freeze. There, in my bedroom window, I saw a face watching me. A face that wasn't mine, wasn't anyone I recognized. I blinked, and it was gone, but the image was seared into my mind. Heart pounding, I rushed into the house, locking the door behind me. I searched every room, every closet, but found nothing out of place. As I stood in my bedroom, staring at the window where I'd seen the face, a chilling thought occurred to me. What if the face I'd seen wasn't an intruder, but my own new reflection? The realization hit me like a physical blow. I sank to the floor, my back against the wall, and let out a strangled laugh that turned into a sob. I was losing my grip on reality, on my very identity. As I sat there, surrounded by the trappings of a life that no longer felt like my own, I made a decision. I couldn't go on like this. Tomorrow, I would find answers, no matter the cost. Because if I didn't, I feared there would soon be nothing left of Jennifer Thompson to save. The night stretched on, sleep eluding me as I grappled with the terrifying possibilities that lay ahead. Who would I be when the sun rose? Would there come a day when I looked in the mirror and saw a complete stranger staring back? As dawn broke, casting long shadows across my bedroom, I steeled myself for the day ahead. One way or another, I would get to the bottom of this. I had to, before I disappeared completely. The soft glow of my laptop screen illuminated the darkened living room as I hunched over it, my eyes burning from hours of intense searching. Empty coffee mugs littered the coffee table, testament to my desperate attempt to stay awake and focused. I had called in sick to work, unable to face another day of pretending everything was normal when my world was crumbling around me. Body dysmorphia, prosopagnosia, dissociative identity disorder, I muttered, scrolling through yet another medical website. None of these conditions quite fit what I was experiencing, but I was grasping at straws, searching for any explanation that might make sense of my living nightmare. A knock at the door startled me out of my research-induced trance. I glanced at the clock, 2:37 p.m. Who could it be? Cautiously, I approached the door, peering through the peephole. It was Sarah, my paralegal and now my confidant in this bizarre situation. I opened the door, wincing at the bright afternoon sunlight. "Jen, you look terrible," Sarah said, her eyes widening as she took in my disheveled appearance. "Have you slept at all?" I shook my head, stepping aside to let her in. "I can't sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I'm afraid I'll wake up as someone else entirely." Sarah's expression softened with sympathy. She held up a paper bag. "I brought you some food, and I've been doing some research of my own." We settled on the couch, and I reluctantly nibbled on the sandwich she'd brought while she pulled out a notepad. "I've made some calls," Sarah began, her tone cautious but determined. "There's a neurologist at Mount Sinai who specializes in rare perceptual disorders. I think you should see him." I set down the sandwich, my appetite vanishing. "And tell him what exactly? That I'm turning into someone else? That my reflection is changing? He'll have me committed, Sarah." "We don't have to tell him everything right away," she argued. We can start with the symptoms. The visual distortions, the feeling of disconnection from your body. There might be a medical explanation we haven't considered. I was about to argue further when my laptop chimed with a new email notification. Grateful for the distraction, I turned to check it and felt my blood run cold. The subject line read, "We know what's happening to you." With trembling hands, I opened the email. The message was brief and cryptic. Ms. Thompson, your participation in Trial 37B has yielded unexpected results. For your safety and the integrity of the study, cease all attempts to investigate your condition. Further instructions will follow. Nexus Pharmaceuticals. What is it? Sarah asked, noticing my sudden pallor. I turned the laptop towards her, watching as her eyes widened in shock. Nexus Pharmaceuticals? She breathed. Jen, isn't that the company you were investigating for fraud? I nodded, my mind racing. But I never participated in any trial. I would remember something like that. Sarah's brow furrowed in concentration. Unless they did something without your knowledge. Jen, this could be huge, if they've been conducting illegal trials. Then I'm living proof, I finished, a mix of fear and determination coursing through me. We need to find out more about this Trial 37B. For the next few hours, Sarah and I scoured the internet for any mention of Nexus Pharmaceuticals and their clinical trials. We found nothing concrete, just vague press releases about groundbreaking research in cognitive enhancement. As night fell, Sarah reluctantly left, making me promise to call her if anything changed. Alone again, I felt the weight of my situation pressing down on me. I paced the living room, my mind whirling with possibilities and fears. A sudden, wild idea struck me. I grabbed my keys and headed out, driven by a desperate need for answers. The city was quiet as I drove to my office building. The night security guard nodded sleepily as I flashed my ID, not questioning my late-night appearance. My heart pounded as I rode the elevator to my floor. I snuck into my doctor's office after hours, rifling through files with shaking hands. Dr. Patel had been my physician for years. If anyone had records of my involvement in a clinical trial, it would be him. As I searched, a file labeled Thompson Jennifer Confidential caught my eye. I pulled it out, my breath catching as I read the contents. Subject shows remarkable adaptability to compound NX37. Cellular restructuring progressing faster than anticipated. Recommend continued observation without subject's knowledge. My blood ran cold as I uncovered documents detailing a top-secret reality-altering drug experiment. Phrases jumped out at me. Neuroplasticity enhancement, physical adaptation acceleration, memory suppression successful. I staggered back, the file slipping from my numb fingers. This couldn't be real. And yet, it explained everything. The changing reflection, the subtle physical alterations, even the gaps in my memory. As dawn broke, I realized I was in too deep, and there was no turning back now. I quickly photographed every page of the file with my phone, then carefully replaced everything as I had found it. Driving home, my mind raced with the implications of what I'd discovered. Nexus Pharmaceuticals hadn't just been committing fraud, they were playing God, altering human beings at a cellular level. And somehow, I had become one of their unwitting test subjects. Back in my apartment, I paced restlessly, unsure of my next move. Should I go to the police? The media? But who would believe such an outlandish story? My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Any updates? Are you okay? I stared at the message, torn between the desire to confide in her and the fear of putting her in danger. Before I could decide, another email notification popped up on my laptop. This one was from an encrypted address, the subject line simply reading, "Help." With trepidation, I opened it. Ms. Thompson, you're not alone. There are others like you, subjects of Trial 37B. We're meeting tonight. If you want answers, come to the abandoned Nexus lab on the outskirts of town. 11 p.m. Come alone. Trust no one. I read and reread the message, my heart pounding. Could this be a trap? Or was it my only chance at understanding what was happening to me? As the day wore on, I wrestled with the decision. By nightfall, I knew what I had to do. I couldn't live with this uncertainty any longer. At 10:45 p.m., I pulled up to the dilapidated building that had once been a Nexus Pharmaceuticals research facility. The windows were dark, the parking lot overgrown with weeds. It looked like the perfect setting for an ambush. Taking a deep breath, I got out of the car, my hand clutching the pepper spray in my pocket. As I approached the building, a figure emerged from the shadows. "Jennifer Thompson?" a hoarse voice called out. I froze, my finger on the pepper spray trigger. "Who's asking?" The figure stepped into the dim light cast by a distant street lamp. It was a man, or at least, it had been once. His features seemed to shift and change as I watched, never settling into a single recognizable face. "My name is David," he said, his voice filled with a pain I recognized all too well. Or at least it used to be. "Welcome to the aftermath of Trial 37B. As more figures emerged from the darkness, each with faces that seemed to ripple and change, I realized I was standing on the precipice of a truth far more terrifying than anything I had imagined. The search for answers had led me here, to this gathering of the changed, the altered, the forgotten subjects of a monstrous experiment. And as I looked at their ever-shifting faces, I knew with chilling certainty that I was seeing my own future reflected back at me. The first rays of dawn were breaking over the city skyline as I stood before the imposing glass facade of Nexus Pharmaceuticals headquarters. My heart raced, fueled by a potent mixture of fear, anger, and desperation. The revelations from last night's clandestine meeting with other Trial 37B subjects had left me reeling, but also more determined than ever to uncover the truth. I took a deep breath, straightened my suit jacket, and strode through the revolving doors with a confidence I didn't entirely feel. The lobby was a hive of activity, employees rushing to start their day, oblivious to the dark secrets harbored within these walls. At the reception desk, I flashed my most professional smile. "Jennifer Thompson to see Dr. Elias Brenner. I have an appointment." It was a lie, of course. But after a night of intense research and some less than legal hacking courtesy of one of my fellow 37B subjects, I had a name. The man behind the experiment that was slowly erasing my identity. The receptionist tapped at her computer, frowning slightly. "I'm sorry, Miss Thompson, but I don't see any appointment for Dr. Brenner today." I leaned in, lowering my voice conspiratorially. "It's a rather sensitive matter. Perhaps he forgot to add it to his calendar. If you could just give him a call, I'm sure he'll want to see me." She hesitated, then nodded, picking up the phone. I held my breath as she spoke quietly into the receiver. After a moment, she looked up at me, surprised. "Dr. Brenner will see you. 15th floor, suite 1502. I nodded my thanks, trying to keep my expression neutral as I walked to the elevators. I hadn't expected it to be this easy. Was Brenner curious about my unexpected visit, or did he know exactly why I was here? The elevator ride seemed to take an eternity. When the doors finally opened on the 15th floor, I stepped out into a plush, carpeted hallway. Suite 1502 was at the end, its frosted glass door bearing the name Dr. Elias Brenner, Chief Research Officer. I knocked, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure it could be heard through the door. "Come in," a deep voice called from within. I entered to find a spacious office, one wall entirely of glass offering a breathtaking view of the city. Behind an imposing desk sat a man in his late 50s, salt and pepper hair neatly combed, his piercing blue eyes studying me intently. "Ms. Thompson," he said, his tone neutral. "To what do I owe this unexpected pleasure?" I closed the door behind me, my anger suddenly boiling to the surface. "Cut the act, Dr. Brenner. I know about Trial 37B. I know what you've done to me, to the others." Brenner's expression didn't change, but I saw his hand move slightly towards his desk drawer. "I'm afraid I don't know what you're talking about, Ms. Thompson. Perhaps you should sit down. You seem agitated." "Agitated?" I laughed bitterly. "That's one way to put it. How about terrified, furious? I'm losing myself, Dr. Brenner. My face, my body, they're changing. And it's all because of your little experiment. A flicker of something, surprise, concern, crossed Brenner's face. Ms. Thompson, I assure you, don't lie to me, I shouted, slamming my hands on his desk. I've seen the files. I've met the others. David, Sarah, Michael, they're all changing too. What have you done to us? Brenner was silent for a long moment, his eyes never leaving mine. Then, to my surprise, he sighed heavily, seeming to deflate. You weren't supposed to know, he said quietly. None of you were. The memory suppression was meant to be foolproof. I felt a chill run down my spine. So it's true. You've been experimenting on us without our knowledge or consent. Brenner nodded, his expression a mixture of guilt and... was that excitement? Trial 37B is the culmination of decades of research. We've unlocked the key to human adaptability, Ms. Thompson. Imagine a world where humans could physically adapt to any environment, any situation. The possibilities are endless. And the cost? I spat. Our identities? Our lives? A necessary sacrifice for the greater good, Brenner said, his voice hardening. You have no idea of the potential of what we've created. I shook my head in disbelief. You're insane. You can't just play God with people's lives. Brenner stood abruptly, his calm facade cracking. You don't understand. None of you do. This is bigger than any one person. We're on the brink of evolutionary breakthrough. As he ranted, I noticed movement behind him. Through the glass wall, I could see security guards approaching. Brenner must have triggered a silent alarm. This ends now, I said, my voice shaking with anger and fear. I'm going to expose everything. The world will know what you've done. Brenner's lips curled into a cold smile. And who will believe you, Ms. Thompson? A lawyer suffering from delusions making wild accusations against a respected pharmaceutical company? I'm afraid this is where your little investigation ends. The door burst open, and 2 burly security guards entered. Is there a problem here, Dr. Brenner? Brenner's smile never wavered. Yes, gentlemen. Ms. Thompson here is unwell. Please escort her from the building. No, I shouted, backing away. You can't do this. You can't cover this up. As the guards approached me, I felt a surge of panic. In that moment of heightened emotion, something strange happened. I caught my reflection in the glass wall, and to my horror, I saw my face begin to change. My features shifted, morphed, until I was staring at a completely different person. The guards hesitated, confused. Even Brenner looked shocked. What are you? He whispered, a mix of fear and awe in his voice. I didn't wait to find out. Taking advantage of their momentary confusion, I bolted for the door. I ran down the hallway, my heart pounding, my mind reeling from what had just happened. Had I really changed my appearance at will? Was this the true extent of what Brenner's experiment had done to me? I burst out of the stairwell into the lobby, ignoring the startled looks from employees and visitors. As I ran through the revolving doors onto the street, I heard shouts behind me. They were in pursuit. I ran blindly, pushing through crowds, darting across streets. I had no plan, no destination in mind. All I knew was that I had to get away, had to find somewhere safe to process what had just happened. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, I found myself in a quiet alley, gasping for breath. I leaned against a wall, trying to calm my racing heart. What now? Where could I go? Who could I trust? As my breathing slowed, I became aware of a tingling sensation across my skin. I looked down at my hands and watched in fascination and horror as they seemed to ripple, the skin tone changing, the shape of my fingers altering subtly. I fumbled for my phone with shaking hands, dialing the one person I thought might still be able to help me. Sarah? I said when she answered, my voice trembling. I need your help. Something's happened. I don't know who I am anymore. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Sarah's voice filled with concern. Jen? Is that you? You sound different. I closed my eyes, fighting back tears. I don't know if I'm Jen anymore. I don't know what I am. But I know the truth now, Sarah. About Nexus, about the experiment, and they're after me. Oh my God, Sarah breathed. Okay, listen to me. Don't go home. Jennifer, it's time for your medication. I looked up to see Nurse Chen, a kind-faced woman in her 40s, standing in the doorway with a small paper cup. She'd been one of the few bright spots in this nightmare, always treating me with compassion despite my supposed condition. Thank you, Nurse Chen, I said, forcing a smile as I took the cup. I pretended to swallow the pills, a trick I'd perfected over the past few days. I couldn't risk having my mind clouded, not when I was so close to finding a way out. As Nurse Chen checked my mouth to ensure I'd taken the medication, I caught sight of my reflection in her glasses. For a moment, my features seemed to shift, revealing a glimpse of my old self. I blinked, and it was gone. Is everything all right, Jennifer? Nurse Chen asked, noticing my sudden tension. I nodded, trying to keep my voice steady. Yes, just tired. When is my next session with Dr. Harriman? Tomorrow morning, she replied. Try to get some rest. You've been making good progress. As she left, closing the door behind her, I let out a long breath. Progress. That's what they called it when I pretended to accept their diagnosis, when I played along with their belief that I was suffering from a severe dissociative disorder. Little did they know, I was biding my time, waiting for the right moment. That moment came sooner than I expected. As I lay on my bed that night, unable to sleep, I heard the faint wail of a siren in the distance. It grew louder, accompanied by the sound of hurried footsteps in the hallway outside. Curious, I crept to my door, pressing my ear against it. I could make out snatches of urgent conversation. Fire in the East Wing. Evacuate non-critical patients. All hands on deck. My heart began to race. This was it, the distraction I'd been waiting for. I rushed back to my bed, rummaging underneath the mattress where I'd hidden a makeshift lockpick fashioned from a twisted paperclip. With shaking hands, I began to work on the lock of my door. The minutes ticked by agonizingly slowly as I manipulated the lock, the sounds of chaos growing outside. Just as I was about to give up, I heard a satisfying click. The door swung open. The hallway was a flurry of activity, staff rushing back and forth, escorting patients towards the exits. In the confusion, no one paid attention to me as I slipped out of my room and joined the flow of people. As we neared the main entrance, I caught sight of a familiar face. Dr. Harriman, my psychiatrist, deep in conversation with a security guard. I ducked my head, praying he wouldn't notice me. "Hey, you there?" a voice called out. My blood ran cold. I turned slowly, expecting to see Dr. Harriman pointing at me. Instead, I saw a firefighter gesturing urgently. "This way, miss. We need to clear the building." Relief washed over me as I followed the firefighter's directions, emerging into the cool night air. The parking lot was chaos, filled with patients, staff, and emergency vehicles. In the distance, I could see smoke rising from one wing of the hospital. Taking advantage of the confusion, I slipped away from the crowd, my bare feet silent on the asphalt as I made my way towards the street. Freedom was so close I could taste it. Jennifer? Jennifer Thompson. I froze. It was Dr. Harriman's voice. I turned to see him pushing through the crowd towards me, his face a mask of concern and determination. In that moment of panic, something strange happened. I felt a tingling sensation across my skin, a rippling that started at my core and spread outwards. Dr. Harriman's eyes widened in shock as he approached, his pace slowing. "I'm sorry," he said, looking confused. "I thought you were someone else. Are you all right, miss?" I nodded mutely, realizing with a jolt that my appearance must have changed. The experiment's effects were becoming more pronounced, more controllable. "You should join the others," Dr. Harriman said, gesturing towards the gathered patients. "We need to account for everyone." "Of course," I replied, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. "Thank you, doctor." As he turned away, I didn't waste another moment. I ran, ignoring the pain in my bare feet as I hit the sidewalk. I ran until the sounds of sirens faded into the distance, until the only sound was my own labored breathing and the pounding of my heart. Finally, when I felt I couldn't take another step, I collapsed onto a bench in a small park. The night was quiet here, the events at the hospital a world away. As I caught my breath, I took stock of my situation. I was free, but I was also alone, dressed in hospital pajamas with no money, no phone, and no idea where to go next. And somewhere out there, Nexus Pharmaceuticals was surely looking for me. A rustling in the bushes nearby made me tense, ready to flee again. But instead of a threat, a small, scruffy dog emerged, eyeing me curiously. "Hey there," I said softly, holding out my hand. The dog approached cautiously, sniffing my fingers before allowing me to pet it. "Looks like we're both lost, huh?" As I stroked the dog's fur, an idea began to form. I couldn't go back to my old life. Nexus would be watching for Jennifer Thompson, but maybe I didn't have to be Jennifer Thompson anymore. I stood up, my decision made. "Come on, buddy," I said to the dog. "Let's go find a new life." We set off down the darkened street, an odd pair, a woman in hospital clothes and a stray dog. But with each step, I felt my appearance shifting, changing. By the time we reached the end of the block, Jennifer Thompson had disappeared entirely, replaced by someone new. The next few days were a blur of constant movement and vigilance. I slept in shelters, using my ability to change my appearance to avoid staying in one place too long. I picked up odd jobs for cash, always looking over my shoulder, always ready to run. But I couldn't run forever. I needed allies, resources, a plan to expose Nexus and find a cure for what they'd done to me and the others. It was a week after my escape when I finally worked up the courage to make contact. From a payphone in a busy train station, I dialed a number I knew by heart. "Hello?" Sarah's voice was cautious, wary. "Sarah, it's me," I said, my throat tight with emotion. "It's Jennifer." There was a long pause. "Jen, is it really you? Where are you? What happened?" "It's a long story," I replied, glancing nervously around the station. "I can't explain everything now, but I need your help. Can we meet?" Another pause. Then, "Of course. Tell me where and when." As I hung up the phone, I felt a mix of hope and fear. I was taking a huge risk, but I couldn't do this alone. The dog, who I'd started calling Max, nuzzled my hand reassuringly. "Well, Max," I said, scratching behind his ears. "Looks like we're not alone anymore. Let's go meet a friend." As we walked out of the station into the bustling city, I allowed myself a small smile. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a glimmer of hope. The great escape was just the beginning. Now, the real fight could start. I may not have known who I was anymore, but I knew what I had to do. Nexus Pharmaceuticals had no idea what was coming for them. The bustling cafe was a cacophony of clinking cups and murmured conversations. I sat in a corner booth, my hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee, my eyes constantly scanning the entrance. The face I wore today was unfamiliar. Mousy brown hair, unremarkable features, the kind of person your eyes would slide right past in a crowd. It wasn't the face Sarah knew, but it was safer this way. The bell above the door chimed and Sarah walked in. Her eyes darted around nervously before settling on me. I raised my hand slightly, and recognition flickered across her face. She slid into the seat across from me, her expression a mix of relief and apprehension. "Jen?" she whispered, leaning forward. "Is it really you?" I nodded, feeling a lump form in my throat. "It's me, Sarah. I know I look different, but—" "How?" she interrupted, her eyes wide with disbelief. "How is this possible?" I took a deep breath. "That's what I need to tell you about. But first, are you sure you weren't followed?" Sarah shook her head. "I was careful, just like you said in your message. Jen, what's going on? Everyone's been looking for you since you disappeared from the hospital." "I didn't disappear," I said, my voice low and intense. "I escaped. Sarah, everything I told you before, about Nexus Pharmaceuticals, About the experiment? It's all true, and it's worse than we thought. Over the next hour, I poured out the whole story. My confrontation with Dr. Brenner, my involuntary commitment to the psychiatric ward, my discovery of my ability to change my appearance at will. Sarah listened in stunned silence, her coffee growing cold and forgotten. "My God, Jen," she breathed when I finished. It's unbelievable. If I hadn't seen you change with my own eyes, I don't know if I could." "I know," I said, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. "It's insane, but it's real, and I need your help to expose what Nexus has done." Sarah nodded slowly, her journalist instincts clearly kicking in. "Okay. What do you need me to do?" "We need to find the others," I said. "The other subjects of Trial 37B. I met some of them before, but we got separated after my confrontation with Brenner. If we can gather everyone, document their stories, their transformations, we'd have irrefutable proof," Sarah finished, her eyes lighting up. "Jen, this could be the biggest story of the century." As we began to plan our next moves, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I wasn't alone in this fight anymore. Our first breakthrough came 3 days later. Sarah had been discreetly reaching out to her contacts in the medical community, and one of them had heard rumors of a man with an unusual condition being treated at a private clinic upstate. We drove up in Sarah's beat-up Honda, the fall foliage a blur of reds and golds outside the window. As we approached the clinic, a sense of unease settled in my stomach. "Something's not right," I murmured, my eyes fixed on the building. It looked more like a fortress than a medical facility, with high walls and security cameras at every corner. Sarah parked a block away, and we approached on foot. As we neared the entrance, I felt a familiar tingling sensation across my skin. My appearance began to shift, adapting instinctively to blend in with our surroundings. "Jen?" Sarah gasped. "Your face." "I know," I said, my voice now deeper, more authoritative. "Follow my lead." We strode up to the reception desk where a bored-looking guard sat. I flashed a badge I had materialized, a perfect replica of an FBI identification. "Agents Miller and Chen," I said briskly. "We're here to see the patient brought in last week, unusual case." The guard straightened, suddenly alert. "I don't have any record of—" "This is a matter of national security," I interrupted, letting an edge of impatience creep into my voice. "Now, are you going to cooperate, or do I need to call your superiors?" It worked. Within minutes, we were being led down a sterile hallway to a heavily guarded room. As the door opened, I saw a figure huddled in the corner, a man whose features seemed to be in constant flux, never settling on one appearance for more than a few seconds. "David?" I said softly, recognizing him from our clandestine meeting weeks ago. His head snapped up, his eyes wild with fear and confusion. Who are you? How do you know my name?" I let my appearance shift back to the one he would recognize. "It's me, Jennifer. We met before with the others from Trial 37B. Recognition dawned in his eyes, followed quickly by panic. "You shouldn't be here," he hissed. "They're watching, always watching. They'll find you too." "Who's watching, David?" Sarah asked gently, pulling out a small recorder. "Can you tell us what happened to you?" David's story spilled out in a torrent of words. After our meeting, he had tried to go public with what Nexus had done to him. But before he could, he was seized by men in black suits and brought to this facility. They had been running tests on him, trying to replicate and control his transformations. "They're not trying to cure us," he said, his voice breaking. "They want to weaponize us, turn us into the perfect spies, the perfect assassins, shapeshifters who can become anyone, infiltrate anywhere." The implications hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just about unethical medical experiments anymore. This was about creating a new kind of weapon, one that could change the face of espionage and warfare forever. Suddenly, alarms began to blare. David's eyes widened in terror. "They know you're here," he said. "You have to run." "Not without you," I said firmly. I turned to Sarah. "Get that recording out. No matter what happens to me, make sure the world knows the truth." Sarah nodded, her face pale but determined. Be careful, Jen. I took a deep breath, feeling the now familiar sensation of my body changing. I grew taller, broader, my features hardening into those of a burly security guard. Let's go, David, I said, my voice now a deep baritone. We burst out of the room, pushing past the startled guards outside. Chaos erupted around us as we ran through the hallways, alarms screaming and voices shouting. I half-carried, half-dragged David, who seemed to be growing weaker by the second. We rounded a corner and came face to face with a group of armed men in black tactical gear. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Then, acting on pure instinct, I let my appearance shift again. In the blink of an eye, I had taken on the appearance of Dr. Brenner himself. Stand down, I barked in Brenner's voice. This is a code red situation. I'm evacuating this subject personally. The men hesitated, clearly confused. It was all the opening we needed. We pushed past them and burst through the emergency exit, setting off another cacophony of alarms. The cool night air hit us like a slap to the face as we ran across the parking lot. I could hear shouts and footsteps behind us, getting closer by the second. There, David gasped, pointing to a row of cars. We sprinted towards them, desperation giving us speed. I pressed my hand against the driver's side window of a nondescript sedan, concentrating hard. To my amazement, my hand seemed to meld with the glass, passing through it like it was water. I reached in and unlocked the door. Get in, I yelled to David, sliding behind the wheel. My hands moved of their own accord, fingers elongating and reshaping until they matched the car's ignition key perfectly. The engine roared to life. We peeled out of the parking lot just as our pursuers reached the cars. In the rearview mirror, I saw Dr. Brenner himself emerge from the building, his face contorted with rage. As we sped down the dark highway, David slumped in the passenger seat, his breathing labored. Thank you, he whispered. I thought I'd die in there. I reached over and squeezed his hand. We're not out of this yet, I said grimly. But we will be. And when we are, we're going to make Nexus pay for what they've done to us. As the miles flew by, my mind raced with the implications of what we'd learned. Nexus wasn't just experimenting on unwitting subjects. They were creating living weapons. The revelation changed everything. Our fight for justice had just become a battle for the future of humanity itself. I glanced at David, who had finally succumbed to exhaustion, and then at my own reflection in the rearview mirror. The face looking back at me was my own, for now. But I knew that from this moment on, nothing would ever be the same again. The road stretched out before us, dark and uncertain. But for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a fierce determination burning within me. We had the truth on our side now, and armed with that truth, we were going to bring Nexus Pharmaceuticals crashing down no matter the cost. The harsh fluorescent lights of the Nexus Pharmaceuticals basement flickered ominously as I made my way down the corridor. My heart pounded in my chest, but my steps were steady, my disguise impeccable. To anyone who glanced my way, I was just another janitor, pushing my cart of cleaning supplies, invisible and forgettable. It had taken weeks of careful planning to get to this point. After rescuing David from the secret facility, we had gone into hiding, gathering intel, and building a network of allies. Sarah's investigative skills had been invaluable, helping us piece together the true extent of Nexus's operations. And now, finally, we were ready to strike at the heart of the beast. I rounded a corner, my eyes scanning for the security cameras I knew were there. A quick shift of my features, just enough to blur my face on any recordings, and I continued on. The lab I was looking for should be just ahead. As I approached the heavy steel door marked Restricted Access, I heard voices from within. I slowed my pace, straining to listen. The latest batch of NX-37 is showing promising results, a man's voice said, clinical and detached. Subject 23 displayed a 47% increase in cellular plasticity. Excellent, replied a voice I recognized with a chill. Dr. Brenner. And the memory suppression? Still at 92% efficacy. We're working on improving that. See that you do. The military contract depends on it. My blood ran cold. They were still experimenting, still creating more victims like me and David. And now they had military backing. The situation was even worse than we'd feared. I waited until the voices faded, footsteps retreating down another corridor. Then, with a deep breath, I approached the door. The keycard reader glowed red, a seemingly impenetrable barrier. But I had an ace up my sleeve, or rather, in my very DNA. Concentrating hard, I felt the now familiar tingling sensation as my right index finger began to change. The flesh rippled and reformed, taking on the exact shape and composition of the lab's access card. With a trembling hand, I pressed my transformed finger to the reader. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then, with a soft beep, the light turned green. The door slid open. I slipped inside, my eyes widening at the sight before me. The lab was massive, filled with state-of-the-art equipment and rows upon rows of computer terminals. And there, in the center of it all, was what I had come for. The main server, the beating heart of Nexus's dark operation. As I approached the server, my janitor's disguise melted away, replaced by the appearance of one of the lab techs I had observed during my reconnaissance. I pulled out a small flash drive, courtesy of our tech-savvy allies, and plugged it into the server. Come on, I muttered, watching as lines of code flashed across the screen. The virus we had created was worming its way into Nexus's systems, copying every file, every secret. A soft chime indicated the download was complete. I pocketed the drive, my heart racing with a mixture of fear and elation. We had done it. We had the evidence we needed to bring Nexus down. But as I turned to leave, a voice froze me in my tracks. Well, what do we have here? Dr. Brenner stood in the doorway, flanked by two burly security guards. His eyes gleamed with a mixture of anger and fascination. I must say, Ms. Thompson, you've exceeded even my wildest expectations, he said, stepping into the room. Your control over the NX-37 transformations is remarkable. I felt my disguise slipping away, my true face emerging as panic set in. It's over, Brenner, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. We know everything. About the experiments, the military contracts, all of it. Brenner chuckled, the sound sending chills down my spine. Over? My dear, it's only just beginning. Do you have any idea of the power you possess? Of what we could achieve together? Together? I spat. You experimented on us without our consent. You've ruined lives, destroyed families. And for what? To create the perfect weapon? To push the boundaries of human evolution. Brenner's eyes blazed with fervor. Imagine a world where humans could adapt to any environment, become anyone they needed to be. We could end war, solve the climate crisis, colonize other planets. I shook my head, disgust rising in my throat. You're insane. You don't get to play God with people's lives. Brenner's expression hardened. I had hoped you would understand, that you would join us willingly. But if not... He nodded to the guards. Take her. As the guards advanced, I felt a surge of adrenaline. In that moment of heightened emotion, my body responded instinctively. I felt myself changing, growing taller, stronger. My skin hardened, taking on a metallic sheen. The first guard reached for me, and I swung, my fist connecting with a resounding clang. He flew backwards, crashing into a bank of computers. The second guard hesitated, his eyes wide with shock. "What are you waiting for?" Brenner screamed. "Subdue her!" But I was already moving. With strength I didn't know I possessed, I lifted a heavy lab table and hurled it towards them. Brenner and the remaining guard dove out of the way as the table smashed into the doorframe, effectively blocking the exit. Alarms began to blare, the sound piercing through the chaos. I knew I had only moments before the entire building would be swarming with security. "This isn't over, Brenner," I growled, my voice distorted by my metallic form. "We're going to expose everything you've done." With that, I turned and ran towards the far wall. Focusing all my energy, I felt my body changing again, becoming less dense, almost fluid. As I hit the wall, instead of crashing into it, I flowed through it, like water through a sieve. I emerged on the other side, in a dimly lit storage room. Behind me, I could hear Brenner's muffled shouts and the sound of fists pounding on the wall. But there was no time to revel in my escape. I had to get out of the building. Shifting back to my janitor disguise, I made my way through the maze of corridors, my heart pounding with each step. The alarms continued to wail, and I could hear the sound of running footsteps and shouted orders echoing through the building. Finally, I burst through an emergency exit into the cool night air. The parking lot was already filling with security vehicles, their lights painting the scene in flashes of red and blue. But in the chaos, no one paid attention to a lone janitor slipping away into the shadows. I ran until my lungs burned, not daring to look back. When I finally reached the rendezvous point, a nondescript van parked several blocks away. I collapsed into the passenger seat, gasping for air. Sarah, behind the wheel, looked at me with wide eyes. "Did you get it?" With trembling hands, I pulled out the flash drive. "It's all here," I panted. "Everything we need to bring them down." As Sarah peeled away from the curb, I finally allowed myself to relax just a little. We had done it. We had the evidence. But I knew this was far from over. Nexus wouldn't go down without a fight, and Brenner had seen what I could do. He would be coming for me, for all of us. "Where to now?" Sarah asked, her eyes flicking between me and the road. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. "We need to go public, release everything we've found. It's the only way to ensure our safety and to stop Nexus for good." As we drove through the night, my mind raced with possibilities and fears. We were about to change the world, to reveal truths that would shake the foundations of science and ethics, but at what cost? And when the dust settled, what would become of me and the others like me? One thing was certain, there was no going back now. The infiltration had been successful, but it was only the beginning of our fight. As the city lights faded behind us, I prepared myself for the battle ahead, a battle for truth, for justice, and for the very definition of what it means to be human. The old warehouse buzzed with nervous energy. Dim light filtered through grimy windows, illuminating a scene that would have been unbelievable just months ago. Around me, a dozen people, each with the ability to change their appearance at will, prepared for what could be our final battle against Nexus Pharmaceuticals. I stood before them, my heart racing but my voice steady. "Today, we take back our lives," I said, looking each of them in the eye. "Today, we expose the truth to the world." David, still gaunt from his time in captivity but with a fire in his eyes, spoke up. "What if they don't believe us, Jen? What if they think we're freaks, or worse, weapons to be controlled?" A murmur of agreement rippled through the group. I understood their fear. I felt it too. But we had come too far to back down now. "That's why we're doing this live," I explained, gesturing to the array of broadcasting equipment Sarah and our tech team had set up. "We'll show them who we are, what's been done to us, and we'll prove that we're still human no matter what Nexus has done to our DNA." As if on cue, Sarah burst into the room, her face flushed with excitement. "It's time," she announced. "We're live in 5 minutes." A tense silence fell over the group. This was it, the moment of truth. We were about to broadcast our story to the world, to reveal the existence of shapeshifters and the dark conspiracy behind our creation. As we took our positions, I felt a familiar tingling sensation across my skin. My appearance began to shift, cycling through the faces I had worn over the past months. The lawyer, the psychiatric patient, the janitor infiltrating Nexus. Finally, it settled on my true face, the one I had almost forgotten. The red light on the camera blinked on, and Sarah gave me a thumbs up. I took a deep breath and began. "My name is Jennifer Thompson, and I'm not the person I used to be. None of us are." I gestured to the group behind me. "We are the victims and the results of an illegal experiment conducted by Nexus Pharmaceuticals. An experiment that has changed us at the cellular level, giving us abilities that should be impossible." One by one, my companions stepped forward, demonstrating their transformations. Faces shifted, bodies changed shape and size. It was a dizzying display of the impossible made real. "We're not here to scare you," I continued, my voice growing stronger. "We're here to warn you. Nexus isn't just experimenting on unwitting subjects. They're creating living weapons. They plan to sell this technology to the highest bidder, to governments and corporations who would use us as spies, assassins, or worse." I held up the flash drive containing the stolen Nexus data. "We have proof, files, videos, emails, detailing every aspect of their illegal operations. As we speak, this information is being uploaded to secure servers around the world. The truth is out there now, and it can't be buried again." Suddenly, the warehouse door burst open with a deafening crash. Armed men in tactical gear swarmed in, their weapons trained on us. And behind them, looking both furious and triumphant, stood Dr. Elias Brenner. "Cut the feed," he shouted, striding into the room. "This ends now, Ms. Thompson." But Sarah, bless her quick thinking, had grabbed the camera and was still broadcasting. The world was watching as Brenner and his men surrounded us. "Dr. Brenner," I said, keeping my voice calm despite the fear coursing through me. "I'm glad you could join us. Would you like to explain to our viewers why you're here with an armed tactical team? Or shall I tell them about the illegal human experiments you've been conducting?" Brenner's face contorted with rage. "You have no idea what you're doing," he spat. "The advancements we've made, the potential for human evolution, you're throwing it all away." "Evolution?" David stepped forward, his face shifting rapidly between his various forms. "Is this what you call evolution, Doctor? We can't control it. We're losing ourselves." "A minor setback," Brenner dismissed with a wave of his hand. "With more research, more subjects." "More victims, you mean?" I interrupted. "How many more lives are you willing to destroy in pursuit of your twisted vision?" As we argued, I noticed something strange. The armed men were looking increasingly uncomfortable, their weapons wavering. Some were even lowering them entirely. "Sir," one of them said hesitantly, Are these allegations true? Have we been guarding an illegal human experimentation facility?" Brenner whirled on him. "You're here to follow orders, not ask questions." But the damage was done. Doubt had crept in, and it was spreading through the ranks like wildfire. Seizing the moment, I addressed the armed men directly. "You don't have to do this," I said earnestly. "You can choose to stand on the right side of history. Help us expose the truth." For a tense moment, no one moved. Then slowly, one of the men lowered his weapon completely. Then another, and another. "No!" Brenner screamed, his composure finally cracking. He pulled out a pistol, waving it wildly. "I won't let you destroy everything I've worked for." Time seemed to slow down. I saw Brenner's finger tighten on the trigger, saw the muzzle flash. Without conscious thought, my body reacted. I felt myself changing, my skin hardening into an impenetrable shell. The bullet ricocheted off my chest with a metallic ping. Gasps of shock echoed through the warehouse. In the next instant, chaos erupted. The armed men, now firmly on our side, moved to subdue Brenner. My fellow shapeshifters sprang into action, their bodies morphing in ways that defied belief as they helped restrain the remaining Nexus loyalists. And through it all, Sarah kept the camera rolling, capturing every incredible moment for the world to see. As the dust settled, I approached Brenner, now handcuffed and kneeling on the floor. His eyes burned with a mixture of hatred and, was that admiration? "It's over, Doctor," I said softly. "Your secrets are out. The world knows the truth now." He laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "You think this changes anything? There are forces at work here beyond your comprehension. This is bigger than Nexus, bigger than all of us." A chill ran down my spine at his words, but I pushed the feeling aside. There would be time to unravel that mystery later. I turned back to the camera, to the millions of people watching around the world. "You've seen the truth with your own eyes," I said. "We are the products of illegal experimentation, but we are still human. We're not weapons to be used or feared. We're victims seeking justice, and we need your help to ensure that nothing like this ever happens again." As I spoke, I let my appearance cycle through all the faces I had worn, all the identities I had assumed. Finally, I settled back into my true self, or at least what was left of it. "My name is Jennifer Thompson," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "And this is who I am now. All of these faces are me. We are living proof of both the dangers of unchecked scientific experimentation and the indomitable nature of the human spirit. We stand here today, not as monsters or weapons, but as people fighting for our right to exist." I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. To those in power who would seek to exploit people like us, we are not your soldiers. We are not your spies. We are human beings, and we will fight for our freedom with every face, every form we possess. The warehouse fell silent as I finished speaking. Then from outside we heard it, the wail of police sirens, growing louder by the second. Sarah lowered the camera, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Jen, you did it. We did it." "Ooh," I nodded, a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration washing over me. "It's not over yet," I said, looking around at my fellow shapeshifters, at the subdued Nexus personnel, at the armed men who had chosen to stand with us. "This is just the beginning." As the sounds of approaching law enforcement grew louder, I steeled myself for what was to come. Questions, investigations, probably trials. The world as we knew it had changed forever, and we would be at the center of that change. But for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a glimmer of real hope. We had taken our stand, revealed our truth to the world. Whatever came next, we would face it together. A new kind of family, bound not by blood, but by shared experience and the unshakable will to reclaim our humanity. As the first police officers burst through the door, I stood tall, ready to face whatever the future held. The final stand was over, but our story, our fight, was far from finished. The morning sun filtered through the curtains, casting a warm glow across my bedroom. I stood before the mirror, studying my reflection with a mixture of wonder and trepidation. Slowly, deliberately, I watched as my features began to shift. My hair darkened and lengthened, my eyes changed color, my jawline softened. In a matter of seconds, a completely different person stared back at me. With a deep breath, I let the transformation fade, returning to my original appearance, or at least what I believed to be my original appearance. After everything that had happened, I wasn't always sure anymore. A soft knock at the door interrupted my morning ritual. "Jen," Sarah's voice called out. "Are you ready? The car will be here in 20 minutes. "Coming," I replied, giving myself one last look in the mirror before turning away. It had been 6 months since our dramatic revelation to the world. 6 months of intense scrutiny, endless questioning, and a complete upheaval of everything we thought we knew about human biology. The world was still reeling from the discovery that shapeshifters walked among them, and today marked another milestone in our journey. I made my way downstairs to find Sarah in the kitchen, nervously checking her tablet. She looked up as I entered, offering a tense smile. "How are you feeling?" she asked, handing me a cup of coffee. I shrugged, taking a sip. "Like I'm about to jump out of a plane without a parachute, you know, the usual." Sarah chuckled, but I could see the worry in her eyes. "You'll do great, Jen. You always do." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. It was a message from David. "We're all behind you, give 'em hell." A wave of gratitude washed over me. Despite everything we'd been through, our little group of shapeshifters had become a family. We'd need that solidarity for what lay ahead. The sleek black car arrived right on time. As we drove through the city, I couldn't help but notice the changed atmosphere. Billboards advertising genetic testing services, news tickers speculating about the shapeshifter phenomenon, people on the streets wearing t-shirts with slogans like Human 2.0 and Evolve or Die Out. Our story had changed the world in ways we never could have imagined. As we pulled up to the Capitol building, I took a deep breath, steeling myself. Sarah squeezed my hand. "Remember, just tell the truth. That's all anyone can ask of you." I nodded, stepping out of the car. Immediately, we were engulfed in a sea of reporters and flashing cameras. Ms. Thompson, how do you respond to allegations that shapeshifters pose a national security threat? Is it true that the military is developing a shapeshifter unit? Are there more of you out there that we don't know about? I pushed through the crowd, keeping my face neutral. All of your questions will be addressed in my testimony, I said firmly. No further comments at this time. Inside the building, the atmosphere was tense. Aides and politicians hurried through the halls, casting furtive glances my way. I couldn't blame them. To many, I represented a future they weren't sure they were ready for. As we approached the hearing room, I saw a familiar face waiting by the door. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the geneticist who had been working with us since the revelation, offered a reassuring smile. "How are our favorite test subjects doing?" she asked, her tone light but her eyes serious. "As well as can be expected," I replied. "Any last-minute advice?" Dr. Rodriguez shook her head. "Just be honest. The science speaks for itself." "And Jen," she added, her voice lowering, "whatever happens in there, know that you're making history." With a final nod to Sarah and Dr. Rodriguez, I pushed open the doors and entered the packed hearing room. The buzz of conversation died down as I made my way to the witness table. I could feel hundreds of eyes on me, a mixture of curiosity, fear, and anticipation. Senator Harriman, the committee chair, called the session to order. "Ms. Thompson, you have been called here today to testify about the events surrounding the Nexus Pharmaceuticals scandal and the subsequent revelation of individuals with your unique abilities. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" "I do," I said, my voice steady despite the butterflies in my stomach. "Very well," Harriman continued. "Please begin by explaining, in your own words, how you came to be what you are." I took a deep breath and began my story. I told them about the mysterious changes I had first noticed, the terrifying realization that I was losing my identity. I recounted our investigation into Nexus, the discovery of other subjects, and our daring plan to expose the truth to the world. As I spoke, I could see the senators' expressions changing. Some looked horrified, others fascinated. A few seemed skeptical, as if they still couldn't quite believe what they were hearing. "And you claim that Nexus Pharmaceuticals did this to you without your knowledge or consent?" Senator Blakely, a sharp-eyed woman in her 60s, asked. "That's correct," I replied. "We were unknowingly exposed to a compound called NX-37, which altered our DNA at a fundamental level." "But surely," another senator interjected, "such a dramatic change would be noticeable. How could you not realize what was happening?" In response, I did something I knew would shock them. I let my appearance begin to change, slowly at first, then more rapidly. Gasps and murmurs filled the room as I cycled through a dozen different faces and body types. The changes were gradual, I explained, settling back into my original form. By the time we realized what was happening, it was too late. The alterations were permanent. The questioning continued for hours. They wanted to know everything, the extent of our abilities, the potential applications, the risks. I answered as honestly as I could, emphasizing again and again that we were victims, not weapons or lab experiments. Finally, Senator Harriman leaned forward, his expression grave. "Ms. Thompson, I think I speak for all of us when I say that your testimony has been illuminating. But I must ask, what do you and the others like you want from this committee, from this government?" I paused, considering my words carefully. This was the moment we had been waiting for. "Senator, what we want is simple. We want recognition of our basic human rights. We want protection from those who would exploit or fear us. We want the chance to live our lives as normally as possible, given our unique circumstances." I leaned forward, my voice growing more passionate. "But more than that, we want to ensure that nothing like this ever happens again. We need stricter regulations on genetic research, better oversight of pharmaceutical companies, and harsh penalties for those who would experiment on human beings without their consent." The room was silent as I continued. We didn't ask for these abilities. We didn't want to become living proof of the potential for human evolution. But now that we exist, we have a responsibility to ourselves, to you, and to future generations to make sure that science serves humanity, not the other way around. As I finished speaking, I could feel the weight of the moment. Whatever happened next would shape not just our futures, but the future of human genetics and evolution itself. Senator Harriman nodded slowly. Thank you, Ms. Thompson. This committee will take your testimony under advisement as we consider future legislation. As the hearing adjourned, I felt a mix of exhaustion and relief wash over me. Outside the chamber, Sarah was waiting, her eyes shining with pride. You did it, Jen, she said, pulling me into a hug. You spoke for all of us. Over the next few weeks, the world seemed to hold its breath. Debates raged in the media, in academia, in governments around the globe. Were we the next step in human evolution, or a dangerous aberration? A miracle of science, or a cautionary tale? Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the first pieces of legislation began to emerge. The Genetic Rights Act, the Human Evolution Ethics Committee, the Shapeshifter Protection Act. It wasn't perfect. There were still those who feared us, those who wanted to use us. But it was a start. As I stood before a crowd of supporters and fellow survivors, I felt a strength I never knew I possessed. We had been through hell, had our very identities stripped away and reconstructed. But we had emerged stronger, united in our determination to shape a better future. We stand here today, I said, my voice ringing out over the assembled crowd, not as victims, not as experiments, but as pioneers. We are living proof of both the dangers and the potential of genetic science. Our journey has been painful, but it has also opened up possibilities we never dreamed of. I looked out at the sea of faces, human and shapeshifter alike, and felt a surge of hope. The road ahead won't be easy. There will be challenges, setbacks, fears to overcome, but together, we can build a world where science and ethics go hand in hand, where the potential of the human genome is explored responsibly and for the benefit of all. As the crowd cheered, I caught my reflection in a nearby window. The face looking back at me was my own. Changed, yes, but also stronger, more determined. I saw not just myself, but all the faces I could be, all the potential within me. This was our new reality. Uncertain, yes. Frightening often, but also filled with possibility. We had taken the first steps into a new era of human existence, and whatever came next, we would face it together, as humans, as shapeshifters, as one united species looking towards the future. The world had changed. We had changed. But our humanity, our core essence, remained. And in that, I found hope for whatever the future might hold.